Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Just a reminder for both people who are, I know it's a bit like a broken record, but when you're speaking, state your name. And also, like, if you talk again, we have people that join that are on flip phones or non-visual. So just identifying yourself for when you're talking. Appreciate it. Roll call.
Okay, Chisel,
Here.
Neal,
Here.
Carlson,
Here.
Luce,
Here.
Bergen. I can see her. Johanna.
Looks like her audio's connecting.
Hadley,
Here.
Johnson,
Here.
Okay. Noting that Johanna's working at connecting.
I'm back, Mayor. Thank you.
there she is. Say here.
Will do.
Okay, public comments, presentation of the 2019 Annual Police Department Report. Dave.
Hey, good afternoon. I think everybody's got a copy of the annual report. I know there's quite a bit on the agenda today, and then there's a couple of meetings afterwards, so I want to make it short. A couple of things that we did this year, one of the bigger ones was we hosted the FBI National Academy Spring Retrainer. Really big event for the city of Decorah. It's not usually hosted in cities our size. It's in metropolitan areas. Chief Nixon and I did a lot of selling to get the people up here and get it approved. And we had a great time. We had about 50 law enforcement executives from all over the state in town for 3 days of training. We moved the schedule back so that we could host it in April and kind of show off Decorah. A lot of the comments we got back from attendees that have never been to Decorah before said, you have a hidden gem here in Northeast Iowa. So that was a kind of a big event for us at the police department this past year. Another one was I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. during Police Week, which was just last week in the year previous. And I got to counsel and mentor kids that lost a parent to a in the line of duty death. And I got some pictures in the annual report of that. That was a unbelievable experience. The reason I throw some things in like that is just to show you that we're more than just your local police department with like a Barney Fife driving around a squad car. We've got a professional law enforcement department, and we're involved in quite a bit. As far as the statistics go, we had probably 100 more accidents reported this in 2019 than the year before. Almost all of those were minor. I don't want you to read too much into that if you're going over the numbers. A lot of those are fender benders and parking lot accidents. Fatalities were about the same. Personal injury accidents were about the same. So don't get hung up on that number. Calls for service were up about 500 from the previous year. If you've been keeping statistics from the last couple of years, you'll see that's a trend. Every year we're seeing a 100, 200, 300, 400 calls of service increase every year. Our narcotic statistics, they stay the same. I know in the national news, if you're watching it, there's a lot of information out there about the opioid crisis. We haven't seen too much of that. Our main narcotic that we're seeing is marijuana. Methamphetamine is kind of stays where it's at, and that's diminished quite a bit over the years. The reports of simple assaults were down. Reports of domestics were up. If you see the shoplifting line in there, you'll notice that number almost tripled from the year before. That's due to Walmart's loss prevention. They've got some great officers out there doing a lot of work. So that's where that statistic, it's tripled from. It's almost all Walmart.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
On that on that Walmart piece, when you talk about Walmart having officers, do they have in-store police or protection, or what do you mean by that?
They have loss prevention officers.
Okay,
They're plain clothes. They're dressed down. They're there to kind of mingle and fit in. You'd never know they were loss prevention. You'd think it was another shopper next to you. But they don't have the power to arrest. They call us up and we do the arrest. That's why we've got the statistics.
hey, thank you.
Yeah. Theft from vehicle reports went from 23 to 1. Theft from building reports went from 13 to 4. And all other larceny or theft reports went down from 27 to 8. Motor vehicle thefts were also cut in half. So some pretty dramatic numbers as far as reports go. When it comes to arrests, the aggravated assault arrests doubled. But again, I don't want to say it doubled and have that be kind of a shocking figure. We're still under single digits for aggravated assaults. Shoplifting arrests, again, that went up to almost 70. That's Walmart. Public intoxication arrests doubled. And the juvenile arrests were down from 31 to 20 from the previous year. Just kind of a quick rundown of that. If you've got any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, Chief, Andy Carlson here. Quick question. You said you're seeing, a couple hundred more calls. That's kind of been on average the last few years. Do you have any reasons? Is there any specific reason, or is it just, more theft at Walmart and more accidents, or any other reasons you can think of?
Yeah, it's an in general call for service. So that's everything from, I think my neighbor is burning tires in their fire pit, to somebody's dog is barking down the street. It's kind of a conglomerate of all the calls. We're seeing more and more calls every year.
So it's nothing to be alarmed about then?
I would say no. No, it's just more people calling stuff in.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Over the year, the way that you've been tabulating statistics and stuff, has that changed much from year to year? I know that you guys are doing things a little bit differently, but.
Yeah, the way we hunt for statistics is extremely antiquated. If I want to look up a year worth of calls for service at Luther College, I have to type in 700 College Drive and find those records in our system. Then I have to type in Luther College and find those records in our system. Then I have to type in Deeseth Hall, Miller Hall. That's the reason we upgraded our records management system. Is one of the reasons is so that we can get a better idea of our numbers and reports. It depends on who entered it, how they entered it, and that's how we have to decipher it and dig it up.
So with the new system coming on, you expect to see assistance with that piece?
Yeah, that was one of the big selling points that we were after too, was the ability for it to generate reports that we want. And do it, it's going to be easier inputting of information for the user, easier for me to go in and get numbers, and easier for me to generate reports. There's a lot of positives coming out of that system. I know it's expensive. I know you all have seen the price tag that goes along with it, but what we're getting for that is greatly needed.
I just have a question on, so in the report, you talked a little bit about weapons law violation, but I'm curious if when your officers are in homes or on scenes, are you seeing more weapons, either legal or illegal, that you're concerned about, or is that something that you're concerned about as chief of police at all?
It's always there. It's always a concern. And anytime you mix, you notice if you go through our arrest reports, a lot of the arrests that are in double digits for the city of Decorah are alcohol related and narcotic related. So you factor those in, that is a concern. I am not too concerned with the numbers that you're seeing in that report.
But you're seeing more, so just to be clear, you're seeing more armed people in general that is concerning, but it's not necessarily illegal activity, or
I don't, you have to point me to the portion that you're looking at where we're seeing more armed people.
Oh, no, I'm not looking. That's what I was asking you. Just if there were more weapons essentially in Decorah than you've seen in past, whether legal or illegal, that gives you, you've seen this across the country, and it could be just media, but I'm just curious in terms of.
No, it's, I would say we see him on search warrants. Other than that, I think last year that I know of one traffic stop where I pulled a guy over and he advised me that he had a firearm with him and a permit. So I wouldn't say we're seeing more of that, no.
Any other questions? I appreciate the report. I've looked through it once, but I know there's a lot of data there, and I want to make sure that I look at it through again. But obviously, I appreciate the department and the work that's being done for the citizens of Decorah. So thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah, we appreciate your help as well. Thank you.
And thanks for doing the introduction to the police officers on Facebook. That's been pretty fun to read about them.
That was.
Yeah, I've got to credit Brent Parker with that. That was his idea for Police Week to kind of introduce everybody to the public, and I thought that's a great idea. Everybody came up with their own bio, and it was nice to see the different personalities and their sense of humor. And yeah, Brent Parker did a good job with that.
It's good.
Okay, consent agenda.
Consent agenda consists of the minutes of the May 4, 2020 meeting, claims, renewal Class B beer permit for Pizza Hut, including Sunday sales, change order number 1, Lower Ridge Road Improvement Project in the amount of $12,493.51, Resolution 3079, setting a date for a public hearing on a request for rezoning of property, Downing Commercial Subdivision, 172nd Avenue parcels from A1 Agricultural District to C1 Highway Commercial District, and Scenic View Estates subdivision from A1 Agricultural District to R3 Multifamily Residential District, setting the hearing for June 1, 2020, 5:45 p.m. Resolution 3080, setting a date for a public hearing on Decorah City Code amendments to Chapter 1504, Design Criteria in the City of Decorah for June 15, 2020, 5:45 p.m. And Resolution 3084, approving a 2080 agreement for payment of software license and service subscription with Central Square Technologies, LLC for public safety software, hardware, and related services.
Chad, excuse me. I apologize. I just noticed something on the agenda for Resolution 3079. I just realized the time required for publication for rezoning and our publication window, since Decorah Newspapers only publishes legal notices on Tuesdays now, that doesn't provide sufficient time. If I could have somebody, when they approve the consent agenda, if they could amend Resolution 3079 so that the public hearing is June 15th. And I apologize, I just realized that when I was looking at it now.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks, John. Those publication deadlines have changed for us a lot in the last month or so.
And I just have a quick question before I put a motion forward. Why would the 28E for the license and service subscription with Central Square be outside of our 28E for dispatch?
I can answer that if you'd like.
Okay.
The 2080 agreement for the CAD system and for the RMS system is a good portion of it's going to be used in-house by the Sheriff's Department and by the Police Department. And we've had a lot of gentleman agreements over the years in between the sheriff and the chief, and we're trying to go away from that because Sheriff Marks knows he's not going to be sheriff forever. I know I'm not going to be chief forever, so we want to have these agreements laid out and everybody have an understanding for them. And since this is going to cover 10 years, we wanted that out there. And the software is going to be used by the PD and the SO, not just by the dispatch center.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion and with the correction that was given by John Anderson.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda with a modification on Resolution 3079, setting the date for June 15th, 2020.
Motion made by Hadley.
Second. Carlson.
Further discussion?
Just one quick question. We got the minutes in here from May 4th. Do we not have the minutes from last Monday's meeting?
They should be in the Dropbox.
Okay. They're just not on the consent. That's the only reason I'm asking.
Yeah, I guess I'll let Wanda chime in, but I don't know that we usually put minutes on for anything other than if Monday was a special session or a work session.
I believe-
Monday was a special session.
Yeah,
Okay, it was actually a council meeting on Monday. And so those minutes have been done and they're in the Dropbox. We just neglected to put it on the agenda. I'll have it on next time.
okay.
And that
Thank
was
you.
May 11, is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
I think there are several sets of minutes in the Dropbox.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Hadley,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Chisel,
Aye.
Bergen.
Aye.
Okay. Public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 20 budget amendment. You want to give some background on that?
I'll ask Wanda to do that. I've written a few comments in the background notes, but I'll let Wanda kind of take that over and lead the public hearing.
Okay,
Okay, so I'll just go through a few of the highlights of that amendment. The lion's share of it is project related. We have money in there for Locust Road, airport projects, the East Water Street Park project, Doug Road, Oneota Bridge, Gunderson Hangar, the library tanks, the maintenance on the library tanks, and the library, ongoing library repairs that we're doing. Now, some of these, like Locust Road, East Water Street Park, I'm not entirely sure we'll be spending any more money this year that I actually put in the amendment, but just in case, these are all unknowns, so just in case I have to put money in there for them. We won't get the bond money in for Locust Road until next fiscal year. And of course, the water tanks and the library repair, that money we got last fiscal year. So a lot of these things in the amendment tend to overlap by numerous fiscal years. So anyway, that was, a lot of it is project related. We also had a few other notable items. There were some IT expenses. We had some well repairs at the water department. Some of that was reimbursed. Most of that was reimbursed by the insurance company. But again, we have to account for it in our expenditures. We had some equipment purchase at the airport. We had additional legal fees that we spent. We have some expenses at City Hall for our restrooms. You're all aware that we've been updating those restrooms due to some ongoing problems, plumbing problems that we were having. So some of that's in there. Again, a lot of that will be paid by cash on hand. I have to account for some unbudgeted transfers for debt service payments. And that's basically money from Luther and the county that they pay us. I can't put that directly into debt service. I have to put that into the general fund and then transfer it to debt service and pay it out of debt service. So again, we have to account for those things. So that's basically kind of the lion's share of your amendment and some of the highlighted items. Otherwise, there's just, some smaller things throughout that we put some money in for.
Okay,
Happy to answer any questions.
okay. I'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody who wishes to speak to this fiscal 20 budget amendment? Seeing or hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. Consider Resolution 3078 approving the proposed fiscal year 20 budget amendment as presented.
I'd make a motion to approve Resolution 3078 as presented.
That's Randy Chisel.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, second Carlson.
Any other further discussion?
Councilperson Hadley, question for Wanda. How are we doing on the recovery of damages to light poles from insurance companies?
Anything that we were able to identify and have submitted to the insurance company from those that hit those poles has been recovered. There was one that we just had no idea
Right.
who did it, who hit the pole, and they were unable to identify that. We did use a used pole for that one, so the expenses to repair it weren't quite so bad. But otherwise, all of them have been reimbursed by the insurance company of the party that hit them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Chisel,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Bergen,
Aye.
Neal.
Aye.
Motion pass. Public hearing on proposal to enter into a taxable obligation refunding loan agreement.
So this is a required hearing to even consider refunding or refinancing existing bonds. And there are two that our financial advisor has proposed that the city look at, especially in the context of the next item, which is the Locust Road bonding. You can see in my background notes, it's the 2014 Highway 9 water and sewer bonds and the 2018 B issue Gunderson Hangar bonds. Potential refinancing of outstanding debt makes sense to evaluate at this time, just to combine closing costs and et cetera. We still don't know definitively interest rates. These next two action items, these next two resolutions are really administrative functions to keep the process moving forward. Once we get closer to a closing date and we know the final issuance amounts, the dates, the dollars, and the interest rates will be more solidified than they are now. But our financial advisor is projecting about $100,000 savings in each of the two issues if we were to proceed with refunding or refinancing those into the full bond, including Locust Road on the next item. So there isn't much more to present than that, other than to say this hearing is required and this action is required just to keep the process moving.
Okay, I'll open the public hearing on proposal to enter into a taxable obligation refunding loan agreement. Is there anybody in the public that wishes to speak to this item? Hearing or seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Consider Resolution 3082, taking additional action on proposal to enter into a taxable general obligation refunding loan agreement and authorizing the use of a preliminary official statement in connection therewith.
Councilperson Luce would move for adoption, Resolution 3082.
Second.
By Emily Neal.
Yes.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Luce,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Chisel,
Aye.
Bergen,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Carlson.
Aye.
Motion carries. Public hearing on proposal to enter into a general obligation corporate purpose loan agreement.
So basically the same story. We don't know the dollars, the dates, or the interest rate yet, but this process is an administrative function that will keep the process moving towards being able to sell the bonds necessary to finance the Locust Road project.
I'll open the public hearing. Is there any person in the public that wishes to speak at this public hearing? Once again, hearing or seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Consider Resolution 3083, taking additional action on proposal to enter into a general obligation corporate purpose loan agreement and authorizing the use of a preliminary official statement in connection therewith.
Councilperson Luce would move for adoption, Resolution 3083.
Councilperson Hadley will second.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
Like crossing the Ts and dotting the Is.
Pretty much.
Okay.
The
Roll call?
Hadley,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Chisel,
Aye.
Bergen.
Aye.
Consider ordinance 1245, amending chapter 5.28 regarding rental property, short-term rentals. This is the third and final reading.
Mayor, just maybe a quick recap for anybody that's new on the meeting. This culminates tonight in a long process started by the Planning and Zoning Commission to review the short-term or Airbnb rental situation in the community. They spent several months reviewing code, comparing to other cities in similar situations as Decorah, and have presented these changes that basically put our short-term rentals in line with our existing long-term rental program, putting it in parallel with the licensing and registration process and the annual or triennial inspection process as well. Probably the other thing that I would point out, since the council has discussed this several different times, is just to make clear that in the ordinance, it has an effective date of July 1. Usually ordinances are effective upon publication after successful passage of the council. I put July 1 in there just to make sure that we have plenty of time for education and dissemination of information. I would also note that for Airbnbs or for the short-term rentals, it's proposed that the registration cycle for that be April. So really with the ordinance becoming effective July 1 and the registration cycle starting in April, there will be plenty of time to educate and get information out about how this program is going to work.
Thank you for that information and consideration.
I'd move to approve the third and final reading and move to adopt ordinance 1245.
Second.
Made a motion by Bergen, seconded by,
Councilperson Luce.
any other questions or discussion? Roll call?
Bergen,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Chisel.
Aye.
Resolution Resolution 3081, accepting a CARES Act grant offer, grant number 3-19-00225-014-2020 for Decorah Municipal Airport in the amount of $30,000.
This grant award comes unsolicited to the airport, and the Airport Commission is very appreciative. It comes because of the federal CARES Act stimulus package issued several weeks ago in the amount of $30,000. The funding can be used for any legitimate FAA-approved project or service or equipment. And right now, the Airport Commission is suggesting that they have a couple of things on their wish list. Security cameras, additional lighting on the taxiway, perhaps a new snowplow. They'll kind of figure out a way to spend the money, certainly. They're appreciative of the funds. I would note that it's not a lot, but it's something. So maybe it takes one tiny thing off their wish list.
Appreciate the opportunity for sure.
I'll make a motion. No, go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Andy. I was just going to clarify that they do have 4 years to spend the money, but with this amount of money, if they pretty much invest or acquire one thing, it'll probably take care of it in one purchase. So
Make a motion for approval of resolution 3081.
Carlson makes the motion.
Second, Councilperson Luce.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
Carlson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Bergen,
Aye.
Sizzle,
Aye.
Neal.
Aye.
Discussion and possible action on a request for proposals for the offering of public lands for sale and referring the matter to the City Planning and Zoning Commission for recommendations, reference being Fox and Coon Club land.
Okay, sorry, I'm just
That's okay.
organized here. Just to kind of set the stage on this a little bit, this is an item that had been discussed at perhaps a work session or two, certainly a couple of different property committee meetings in regards to an offer from maybe almost a year ago to purchase the Fox and Coon Club land. And John Anderson and I have been kind of working through that process and what it looks like for the city to sell real property. Some of the comments that had come out of the last property committee meeting were, if the city were going to sell the land, could the city put stipulations or regulations or conditions on the sale of that land? And you absolutely can. And that's this document here that we've tried to present to you tonight in draft format, so that we could generate a little bit of discussion and see, first of all, is the council still interested in selling? And if so, under what conditions and requirements might you be interested in doing that? The first thing I would note is if you're willing and interested in moving forward, it will take a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission to sell any real property. That's a code provision in your zoning code. But absent that step, then it would be appropriate for the council to place some restrictions on the land. Some of the things we talked about at the last property meeting were that if you were going to sell the land, would it be restricted to a commercial use? Would they be required, would the successful purchaser be required to develop in a certain period of time? And you can see some of the restrictions or requirements that we've placed in the draft document. So at this time, I would just simply ask for some discussion and council direction on some of the things I just laid out.
Can we,
Can you, yeah, I'm going to ask you to state your
Sure.
name again. Thank you.
this is Emily Neal. Can we put stipulations on it regarding stormwater management in case we haven't passed our stormwater ordinance by then? And I am curious about building code or how we could maybe preclude some of the stuff in the sustainability plan with this work. I guess, I don't know how that would work, but interested in that, thinking about more development and the location of it.
I would assume we would have that jurisdiction to approve that as part of the site plan.
We could do it a couple different ways. The way I would recommend is part of, we could file restrictive covenants prior to conveying it to any new property owner. And in those restrictive covenants, we could have some provisions like that. Now, there's some nuances there. Restrictive covenants generally have a limitation on how long they're good for. We could also do some type of easement, like a stormwater drainage easement, which would be perpetual.
I'm for that.
And also that you could do some stuff as part of the site plan too.
But we won't necessarily get site plan approval, isn't that with P and Z?
Site plans go to P&Z and then final approval by city council.
So it'd be nice to have it, so at least when they drew up their site plan for P and Z, whatever process we use, it'd be nice if they included it in their site plan for P and Z before coming to us.
Yeah, I think if there are some requirements or restrictions you'd want to put on there, I'd say let's get them in this process. I guess I maybe would caution that we try not to be real specific yet, so as to hinder somebody that maybe has some ideas but not real specific ideas. But I think certainly adhering to some level of stormwater management plan is appropriate. I think we have enough of a plan. You could at least get a sense that they're going to incorporate some control measures. For example, right?
So you're looking.
This is your,
Sorry, go ahead, Johanna.
yeah, this is Johanna. I would be in support of moving forward with the RFP process, and was particularly interested in including the no TIF or abatement usage that was recommended in the draft, and had the same request Emily did in terms of having some sort of expectation that stormwater management would be a part of the plan.
Councilperson Luce, and I thought all of the requirements of proposal A through G were quite appropriate, and I would support them. And I think the stormwater management could be added in there as well.
Johanna, do you want to make that in the form of a motion then? You're looking for possible action, correct?
Yeah, so, and maybe one thing, well, possible action today, I mean, this is really just kind of discussion and possible action. I think, the discussion piece is what you've been having. What items do you want to see? What items would you see changing? And then I think the action item, and John, correct me, the action item would be to merely refer this to the Planning and Zoning Commission with some of these conditions and desires of council for them to develop a recommendation. And part of that recommendation would be, to develop some stormwater language. It would come back to you for final action.
Yes, I think that's the right way to go.
Throw some deer management practices in there too.
Yeah, sure, okay. Must have a deer stand, okay.
Exactly, yeah.
So are you looking for any type of a motion on this tonight?
Yeah, I think at least the motion would be to refer it to planning and zoning for a recommendation. If not, stating like Councilman Luce said, items A through G, include those or something like that. Or at least some discussion about the points. If there aren't any other changes, maybe the motion is just simply to refer it to P&Z as presented.
I guess I'm curious as to why we're looking to sell it at this juncture. It seems short-sighted to take the largest piece of buildable land that we have at this point and sell it, unless you have a certain project you have this earmarked for. And if so, the general public should probably be made aware of it for transparency reasons.
So, Andy, when you say a certain project earmarked for, are you referring to the land or the possible revenue?
The revenue from the sale of this land.
Right. So I would add, and maybe others on the council would chime in, but as staff, I know through some of the property committee meetings, it was more responding to some in the community that were interested in acquiring the property for development and less about seeking additional revenue for the city. Although as the idea of revenue for the city has come up, there was a conversation about escrowing or reserving the revenue for some possible foreseen or unforeseen project of the city. In other words, don't just put the money into the bank account and 5 years from now we all wonder where it went, but to earmark it for something specific. But I guess for me, the driver was that you'd had several people interested in the property and maybe the council had interest in selling it.
We don't, but having P&Z put together an RFP for proposal, does that automatically trigger that we're going to sell it, or will it come back to the council before we decide if we're actually going to sell?
It'll come back to the council before you decide. You'll need to take action on that final RFP and send notice. What you're doing today is just simply, you're deciding if this is how you want to proceed, but then that first step is to refer it to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a recommendation.
If we send it to P&Z, I would like to add an H with the stormwater, but
I would also think that the discussion tonight would note in the minutes that we are desirous of using any funds from such purpose, from such sale, for a purpose the council will decide upon, and either escrowing or holding for that specific purpose, not having a specific purpose stated right now.
Councilperson Hadley will make a motion to send the issue to Planning and Zoning for the tentative construction of an RFP for council review.
Luce would second with the understanding this discussion will be noted in the minutes.
Yes.
Any further discussion?
can we have the discussion at a property meeting instead of a regular city council meeting when we get it back, or does it have to come to a council meeting first?
No, I think if you'd like to see their recommendation before you act on it, I think that works.
I'd be interested in that.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Hadley,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Carlson,
No.
Johnson,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Chisel,
No.
Bergen.
Aye.
Okay. City manager, department head, and council reports.
Okay. Mayor, a lot of things continue to move on the Locust Road project. At this time, I would ask if the street and/or budget and finance committee would consider either a joint or discussion committee meeting just to finalize some of the bonding scenarios, to review the refunding options, and just to look at the list of projects included in that bonding. And so I would ask either Chairperson Hadley or Chairperson Chisel on Budget, Finance, and Street to consider that maybe for the next meeting, if not before. And then I think the final thing that I would just touch on before other staff jump in if they have anything is that as we start to see the state and the Department of Health relax some restrictions, we continue to spend a fair amount of time on that at the staff level as well. Of course, we see continued concerns for facilities like parks and recreation and the pool and the library. But we are starting to see facilities similar to City Hall or the other department shops and offices be relaxed a little. And I think our recommendation moving forward is that we will kind of follow that trend. And then we might have a recommendation that some of these facilities open up on June 1. But know that we're still contemplating those provisions. And if we do open any facilities on June 1, we would certainly continue the protective measures that are in place. And we may consider additional protective measures. For example, we walked around City Hall a little bit today and looked at what it means to put in sneeze guards or protective screenings and those types of things as we continue to eye the future over the next few weeks and months. So no real recommendation on that yet. Just know that we continue to work on that. I would ask for council input or feedback if you have any over the next few days as we continue to kind of realize that things continue to change sometimes faster than we can even respond or think about it. So with that, Mayor, that's all I have. I'd turn it over to staff or ask council for any questions.
So if you open June 1st, we won't have a council meeting before that. But I guess I would throw out there that if you do open city buildings, I think masks should be required for public entry into them.
Yeah, and Emily, I appreciate that. And I think, I've thought about that too in terms of, well, if June 1 is the date where a lot of organizations are kind of targeting, we would certainly put an amended city COVID response plan in front of the council. So it might actually be something you'd consider on June 1 to take effect, either at midnight or, in the morning on June 2nd or something like that. Right? I mean, we'll want you to see what we're doing first.
Thank you.
But there's some discussion too, for instance, like the library where they're doing a phased in approach and the board is working closely with that as far as how that would work for the library. I think the only other one was possibly, I don't know if Jeremy had some thoughts as far as streets was concerned too, but there were.
Has there been, sorry, Mayor.
Good.
Has there been any discussion, Chad, from the governor's office or city? So if we start to open up, are there sort of guidelines for when we close back down again? Or is it, we're going to open up, wait and see? I mean, I'm just curious if there's been some forethought into what are the parameters for which we might actually seal back up.
No, I haven't seen any information on that yet. That's why I think a lot of people organizations are looking at that June 1 as some kind of magical date. That's still 2 weeks away. I think we need to be careful about, just kind of following suit. If June 1 is the date that everybody else is using, well, let's make sure we do it for the right reasons. And then we have the right protocols in place. I guess personally, I think that could be the worst case scenario if we open up and then all of a sudden a month later, here we are locked down again. I want to make sure we proceed in a prudent manner, whatever that is.
Well, especially if you're taking into consideration locally, some of that we're starting to see increase. I know today, I think it was at the Board of Supervisors, I was listening to Christy Vandenbroek's report, and there were 2 additional cases that have been added in Winnebago County. So monitoring some of the statistics that are locally as well is prudent for us to make sure that we keep the citizens as safe as possible.
Well, and to keep our staff and elected officials safe as well.
Yeah,
It's a tricky thing, and not all of what we do or don't do affects all of us equally. I mentioned the library and the Parks Department, certainly public safety. They're all impacted in drastically different ways. So, for us here at City Hall to say, yeah, we're okay and we're going to open and we're going to put a sneeze guard at the counter, those kinds of things don't work for everybody else. So I just, with so many other things being open, whether rightly or wrongly, we need to continue to look at the Department of Public Health and kind of take their lead. And that may mean different things for different departments. So.
Well, and I've really appreciated the cities and counties' work of being locked down. I think just because there's an opening doesn't mean that the coronavirus has gone away, and that we have to be really conscious of all the citizens to continue to practice what we've been put in place and has been fairly successful thus far.
I would speak to us having a specific matrix or plan The CDC, from what I've read, has suggested that there be no opening until there had been 14 straight days of a decline of the number of cases reported. I would like for us to have some type of actual standard that the community could see that we were going toward, as opposed to just, well, it looks like things have calmed down. And then, I mean, we're still not doing testing worth jack around here. So I don't know how we even can say, oh, things are getting better June 1st.
I would agree. I mean, I think what we're seeing and what we're hearing out of the CDC is, well, you know, Johnson County and Des Moines might be slowing down. We could very well be ramping up. And so I guess I would like to point us in local metrics as opposed to the state metrics, or to really focus on what's happening in our own community right now with this.
And that could be part of that, what we've been approving thus far, as far as the city plan, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, but I'm not sure we can ignore Minnesota's what's going on there and just say, well, Iowa's numbers are going down, because we're on the border of Minnesota. So I think we have to look at a wider picture rather than just in a county or in a few counties around us.
And we're a vacation hotspot right now.
Yeah.
So maybe Chad, you and your staff can take a look at what some type of terminology that would look like.
Yeah, well, we will. And as I said, I'm you know, not 100% sold that June 1's the date, but
Yeah.
you know, if we continue to see things trend that way, that seems like the next milestone, given all the things we just discussed.
Anything else, Chad?
I don't have anything else. I'm sorry, no.
Yeah, let's see. Let's go to Kristen. She's right there, right at the top of the block.
Well, things have been busy at the library. I sent out my most recent press release to all of you in the middle of last week after the board met and updated their phased expansion of services plan, which I believe I also sent. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about any part of that. The board approved the first 3 phases of that plans, which include a preparatory phase, a return of materials phase, which we are now in, and the curbside pickup phase, which will begin June 1st. We're back to full staff hours here at the library. We've done a lot of work to stagger shifts now that we're working amended hours compared to what our usual open hours had been in the past. As Chad mentioned, the building continues to be closed to the public due to safety concerns for both staff and the public. But we're really excited to accept return materials. Folks are happy to be getting their houses cleaned out of library books that have been sitting around now for a while. And we're thrilled to be able to offer curbside pickup materials in the near future. We know that a lot of people have been making good use of and appreciating all of our expanded digital content offerings. But we also know that a lot of people are really yearning to get a hardcover book or audio book in their hands. So that'll be a fun amendment to current procedures here at the library. In addition to working through figuring out new procedures for all of those different things, we're also working through staff evaluations for all of our staff, including the library board is doing my evaluation at this time. And we're happy to be getting ready to put forward 2 recommendations of names for new Board of Trustees members to the mayor for one of the June council meetings. So that information will be coming shortly.
Were there, Chad, were there staff reports in the Dropbox as well?
Yes, if I have them, they're in the Dropbox.
Okay.
Mayor, I might suggest you just open it up. If anybody has any comments, they can chime in.
Okay. One comment that I had is, as I look at the boxes, it's nice having Darren Swenson back at the table again. He's been noticeably absent for a while, but are there any other staff? Oh yeah, now we go.
Thank you, Lorraine.
You're welcome, Darren. Any of the other staff have anything else? I'll watch to see if anybody unmutes themselves, but
I'll give a real quick heads up. If you're looking for some library materials, we may or may not be doing a soft opening for curbside in the next little bit here. So if you were to say, go in the online system and put a hold on an item, you never know what could happen. You might get a phone call sooner than later.
Is Andy around? Nimrod, is he here? I don't see him on.
Andy is not. I know that there's a lot of discussion. The pool discussion is the biggest one. And I know I looked on the mayor's, there's the mayor's listserv for the league, and there's several of them that are not opening at all for the season. There's more that are just waiting to see kind of what the directives are that are coming down. And he talked about that a lot at the department head meeting today too. And there's a lot of variables, both financial and for safety of the citizens as far as what that looks like.
Mayor, didn't he say that it probably wasn't going to happen because they couldn't get the lifeguards trained? Wasn't that one of the big issues, if not the issue?
Yeah, that's one of the big, that is, well, first of all, even getting lifeguards. Because some of the ones that would come for the summer and work have been out of school and could have jobs. So maybe Chad, maybe I can let you kind of fill in a little more on Andy's report.
That pretty much hits it. It's going to be a challenge, and of course, the longer we go without making that decision, the more our staff are going to find other things to do, and so it just gets it to be a harder and harder decision.
And any news on other programs? I mean, is he just sort of waiting and seeing, kid program wise?
He didn't. I know that they've been doing a variety of different things online and virtually, but I think they're kind of waiting as far as that's concerned, as well as far as registering for anything, basically because of the number of people that would be.
Hey, Mayor.
Yeah.
Andy is here. You can probably let him speak.
Where is he?
Andy, you're up.
I didn't see him on the.
See you on the phone.
Andy, where are you?
I believe it's 4158. Yep, here it comes.
Yep, he's 4158.
Well,
all right. Well, maybe everybody gave my answers for me already, but yeah, I don't know what the first question is. Where's the status of the pool? Maybe we're trying to figure that out ourselves, and as is every pool in Iowa, I guess. Right now, looking at the different departments within Park and Rec, it's the one that'll take the most thought and we'll have to be the most careful about. So, unfortunately, this could be the summer the city needs the pool the most, or kids need the pool the most. So we're continuing to watch for updates. We know the governor has said nothing before May 27th. We've been watching plenty of Zoom meetings with the Iowa Park and Rec Association and trying to figure out what everybody else is doing and figure out what's best in our situation for sure. So training lifeguards could be tough, but we don't know that yet, Andy. It's at this point, it's not a reason that we wouldn't consider opening. I guess in our mind right now, we will open if we can get to the point where we feel safe on things. So.
Thanks, Sandy. Jeremy,
Well, I know that there are lots of people looking forward to large print books and a skate park opening. So your absences are appreciated when noticed.
hey, Jeremy, do you want to make a comment about the loading days and what you're working with for as far as compost and stuff?
Yeah, so we held 2 loading days out at the Yardway site, one on the 2nd, one on the 9th. Both are very successful. I think we estimated a total of about 300 vehicles we loaded over the 2 days. So we're getting rid of a lot of stuff, which is great, but still have a lot more to go. So we are tentatively planning on another loading day this Friday from 8 to 3. So look for a press release on that soon.
Okay, anybody else from the departments?
Lorraine, if I'm still on, I'd touch on a couple other things with the Park and Rec here.
That'd be great.
Okay, so following the governor's proclamation, the campground is back up and running now, although we haven't opened the facilities within the campgrounds. So we're open for campers to come in self-contained units, but we don't have the restrooms open. The playground isn't open. They can't come in the registration booth. So, and it was almost full this weekend. And Scott said that nobody asked about the bathrooms. They were happy to have a place to go and willing to make their own arrangements for that. So that's back moving. The tourism that was mentioned earlier, specifically on the trails, especially around the Dunning Springs Ice Cave Palisades area, has been crazy, and we're trying to do some damage control and be good neighbors with the people that aren't used to those types of crowds being around there right now. We're continuing recreation programming from a distance, and that has gained some new participants. And we'll keep offering things as we can. Right now we're talking about maybe we plan a Little League season in August as opposed to June and July. So trying to keep options open and until we know more. And then the last thing on the pool is I just want to be clear too. We don't want to make any decisions until we absolutely have to. We're trying to keep all options open and be open-minded and think outside the box and in the end do what's best for Decorah. So there'll be a lot of pressure coming on that as I see the dominoes start to fall with other towns and cities in Iowa already giving up on the pool for the summer, including Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. And I think the Waukon City Council and the Charles City Council are both talking about it tonight. And how do we handle it if we are the only one open? So lots to think about there. But I just wanted to let you know on those other things too, because there's a lot of things happening around our world right now that's bringing a lot of people to town, and it's keeping us on the edge of our toes for sure.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, I think we're on to council reports. Let's see, Steve.
Well, I have a heavy heart. Got a call yesterday morning that a friend and former Decorah, Eric Peterson Brandt, had passed away suddenly from his lung cancer situation. So it's hard to lose friends and close ones.
Yeah.
And we know a lot of people right now are losing people. So I think it's a call for compassion to each other, that we treat each other with the respect that humans deserve, rather than just our own agenda being pushed. Check.
Thanks, Steve. Ross.
Nothing at this time, Mayor.
Emily.
I'll just echo Steve with but with sort of a moment of gratitude for everybody who I know is working really hard, making really tough decisions, trying to figure out how we live in this time period, and do the right thing by everyone. So I'm really appreciative of all the city staff and everybody who's making tough decisions every day, and for everybody who's headed back to work and has a lot of trepidation. My heart's with everyone, and just wanted to say thank you.
Randy.
Nothing this evening, Mayor.
Johanna.
Nothing this evening.
Kirk.
Nothing, Mayor.
Did I hit everybody? I think so. See, we've got
Andy.
Who said? Who did I forget?
Somebody.
Oh, Andy.
You look like you needed to be called upon.
I'm so sorry, Andy.
You're absolutely fine. You see, I didn't have any objections to being skipped over. I was fine with it. I'd have to agree with Emily. Thanks to everybody who's out there working their tails off. My family, my cousin, first cousin, his wife has COVID-19. She's a PA in Waterloo. So, you know, it kind of hits home when you finally know someone who's affected by it. So yeah, thoughts and prayers to everybody who's been affected by this, and thanks to everybody who's, like I said, working their tails off. So other than that, on a council note, I do not have anything to share, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Chad, we've got committee meetings following this.
Yes.
Can you, we take a break or we just keep going or?
Well, if you're done with the council meeting, maybe a motion to adjourn and then.
Sure.
Good.
All right, we have several items on the agenda, but starting from the top with an opportunity for discussion about building codes and a building zoning official that we've been talking about for a while. Of all the topics, I feel like this is the one I did not put on the agenda. So I'm here to create space for y'all to talk about it.
I put it on the agenda, and I just think we should maybe make a plan. You know, we had talked about hiring someone this summer, and all I wanted was to know how the council can help Chad. Like, what do we need to do to just facilitate the process?
Chad, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm not up to speed with the latest technology yet. You know, I think the first thing is to review the job description, which I think I mostly have done. I didn't get time, ironically, to get it in the Dropbox. But I do have that. If there's a couple of you that, or maybe this committee, want to work with me on drafting that up so that we can bring it back to this committee or council for approval. That's probably the first step, certainly in the hiring of the person for the position, is to kind of figure out what they're doing. As I've talked to a couple of you over the last several weeks, or certainly back in January at budget time, adopting the building codes can be fairly straightforward, especially if you were to simply look at adopting the state codes by reference. Then there would be less need for a review of the codes to determine what sections you wanted to amend or delete or in other ways change. Some cities will do that to make the codes their own, but that requires a certain level of expertise to be able to go through the codes and determine what it is you want to change or amend out. The simplest, most straightforward way is to simply adopt the state building codes by reference. And then as you bring a person on board, maybe there's a couple of years of inspections and processes under your belt. We could start to get a better understanding of what works and what doesn't work, and then start looking at amending out. So that'd be my recommendation for there. So I guess I say all that to say that, it's really probably more about defining the position in the department than it is about the building codes themselves.
Yeah, and I think. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Emily.
No, I mean, one of the reasons I think I'm excited to adopt the building code is because we want to build an abatement process off those codes, right? So above and beyond building codes towards more sustainability. At least that's in the sustainability plan. So I think it would be great to adopt the Iowa building code.
Especially since
this is Joanna. Oh, go ahead, Ross.
This is Ross Hadley, especially because without a code, it is the fallback code. So it just makes sense to adopt the state code because then as things change, like Chad said, we're not forced to review each time the state changes their thing. If we just adopt a blanket, then it makes revisions and education more simple, in my mind.
I agree.
Are there a couple of you that would be interested in helping me work through the job description and maybe position profile? The budget allows for this position on July 1. So I think, any time after that, we could start advertising and figuring out what that looks like. So between now and then, reviewing the job description, setting up the position profile. I still have some thoughts or concerns on, where we're going to put this person and how they're going to operate, where their physical office is. But we'll figure that out. We've got some ideas here that we've been brainstorming, so.
This is Johanna. I'm happy to review. I'm also aware that many of us have had conversations with you, Chad, probably more in depth about building code than I have. So I don't know if others really want to make sure their hands are on that job description or not.
Luce would be willing to help.
Hadley would be willing to help.
And I was actually waiting for other people. I mean, I'm happy to help too. And certainly I just feel like if you want 3 or 4, that's great. I'm happy to help.
Well, why don't we keep it below a quorum there to have like a working group. And if we go with Luce, Hadley, and Neil, we can work through the framework and then present it back.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. I appreciate you putting this on the agenda and just making sure that we stay committed to carrying out the goals we talked about during budget session and really prioritizing this position July 1. So awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yeah. Our next agenda item is deer management, which is a never-ending conversation for all of us. My experience so we've definitely had citizen comments recently about deer, and I think several of us live in yards with additional deer traffic as well right now. I think my experience is that often we have this discussion in late fall when we're just approaching hunting season. We're sort of fingers crossed that more deer will be eliminated from the herd, and that's really not the ideal situation or time to be taking action. So I think there's been several discussions in the past, maybe a couple of things that folks are interested in talking about tonight. One, knowing that there's just a large quantity of land owned by Luther adjacent to city land, and is a collaborative approach necessary, and if so, is now the time to have that discussion. And I think the other question that we continually raise is how many deer is too many, and how do we know how many deer we have in order to track progress? And I think we keep circling around that question as well. So happy to start in any of those places.
Well, I know that if in terms of deer count, I believe that if we were to adopt the DNR's protocol, we would have to have a count before we could do that. And I believe they would want to do the count in the winter when they can see them better with the overhead. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's right. Last time we looked into this, as far as the DNR's depredation program, they would do a flyover during the winter months and count the herds for us. About the time we were still discussing that or debating that, maybe about ready to kind of go with a program like that, the state pulled all their funding for that program. So they did not do a flyover for us that year. I'm not sure if that funding's back in place for that program or not. I did have the police department at that time do some windshield surveys. They picked several different nights on 2 or 3 different months and just shone the spotlight and counted what they saw. The numbers were not large at that time, but it did give us some idea of some of the known areas where we were seeing or we thought we would see some deer. There's not an exact science even to a flyover herd count. We're going to have to figure out something new, though, if we want to get a baseline of where we think we are.
Chad, I think the last time we had a formal discussion about this, we were talking about whether or not we could use the drone, the fire department drone, because of the heat seeking or the heat sensors, to be able to show clusters and whatnot. So really back to Johanna's point, I think the question is whether or not we can work cooperatively with Luther on this, and if we can, to start doing more education and outreach in our hunting community to take advantage of our existing laws and whatnot, without having to change a special hunting season, urban hunting season with the DNR.
Yeah, and Ross, that's a good point, because one of the other stumbling blocks really for the state's deer depredation program is that it opens up some opportunities, but it also limits some opportunities. So for example, if you own a fair amount of land, you have to subscribe to the deer depredation program, and you can't just get a landowner tag on your own land and go shoot that trophy buck. You have to do it within that depredation program. So we did receive several comments about that and how some of the larger property owners in town were not favorable for that program for that reason.
Is hunting the best method? I mean, I wasn't in any of these discussions, but I am curious about any kind of sterilization program or obviously there's probably a history here.
I don't know that we talked much about the sterilization program. I know Ross had done a fair amount of work on a sniper program. Maybe it was marginally successful, but it was very expensive. And, you know, I think the key to any depredation program is that you have consistency. So whatever you do in year 1 and 2, you probably ought to consider doing it for years 5, 6, and 7 and beyond. When we looked at results for larger metro areas like Dubuque and Clive and Urbandale and Johnston and even Cedar Rapids, the reason they were successful is because they picked a program and stuck to it for a decade or more. It was about that level of consistency.
I'm not sure if Andy Nimrod did on or not. I guess one question I have is, I know we tried the bow hunting process that we have now. Are there any improvements or tweaks or incentives that we could offer into that to make that more effective? Don't need to poke around on that if it's not helpful, but if it is helpful to have some additional action, you know, open to that discussion.
Yeah, I'd have a couple comments. So, you know, it's essentially, I think, 3 hunting seasons since the park board agreed to allow hunting, I guess, in the parks, for a best way to put it. And until this year, there was very little interest. This year, we did have 8 people ask about hunting in the parks. However, none of them were interested in hunting like in town. They wanted to hunt out on the Carlson property or above Pulpit Rock or, you know, so, and none of them got a deer while they're hunting there either. So I think, I mean, there's a ton of variables there, but even if they all got deer, I'm not sure any of them would have had any effect on like the deer by your house, Johanna. So how that loosens up, I'm not exactly sure. I think the problem or the one of the problems with Decorah compared to other places where some urban hunting has helped is in a small town, those of us that hunt all know somebody where you can go hunt, and hunting is something we enjoy, and getting out in a tree stand and watching nature is why we do it. So to be like sitting next to somebody's swing set in their backyard and watching people walk by on the sidewalk and having their dog run up to your tree that's not really hunting. If you're hunting in town, it's more killing. And so I don't know that just purely for hunting if we could ever get the amount of hunters you would want to have a large effect on the herd. Does that make sense?
I had done
Yeah, definitely.
an informal interview with people out at Anthem Archery, because Anthem had offered to act as a clearinghouse for people to certify that they were a good enough shot to operate in an urban area. And that was based on input that I'd gotten from Rob Sand and from some of the other urban deer degradation programs. And, you know, there were probably 15, 20 people that had signed a list expressing interest. But the big thing that Chad referenced was their inability to have dual tags. You know, they don't want to give up that tag. So I don't know if we can pay a bounty for in-town hunting, like true in-town, for elimination of some of these herds that are specifically problematic. But I think that would be the way to do it, because as Andy said, it's a different type of sport. It's a different type of hunting. But yet, perhaps if there was a financial incentive, people would be more interested. So I guess I would open up to that.
I agree with Ross. And when we talked about it a few years ago, Kurt Headington out at Anthem Expedition Archery was definitely interested, and I'm sure he could find the people to do it. I know, like Chad talked about, and Andy too, some of these other places, these urban areas, you know, they do hire sharpshooters. There's White Buffalo that does it. I know they did out in the city, a couple of those cities in Iowa. I think if we could find a local group that would be willing to do it, and yeah, maybe if we do incentivize it, Ross, I think that's not a bad idea, because like Andy said, it's not really hunting. So that's my 2 cents.
And you can't transfer tags, right? Like I can't get a tag and then ask someone else to shoot the deer.
Well, my thought would be is maybe the city could buy the tags or pay for the person's next tag if they get one and turn it in or something like that. So at least there's not a $28 cost every time you shoot a deer to the hunter.
Right.
Right. So
Have
yeah,
them go buy another tag.
let's say that we bought, I don't know, 50 city tags. Can we give those to anyone? Or would that take the place of someone else's tag if they wanted up shooting on that tag?
You might have to reimburse them as opposed to just buy tags.
Right.
We
Can't a person only get so many tags?
You know, right now it's fairly unlimited. There's a limit of the number of like does that could be shot in Winnebago County, but theoretically one person could buy all the tags. So it's all, there isn't like a limit on you, no.
That's not a bad idea.
So in the research phase, when we were all in together, I feel like 2.5 years ago, we did look at a couple of cities, and just tag purchase wasn't enough to move the needle. That was pretty clear in the recommendations that we were looking at. There really needed to be some sort of incentive. So, I mean, at least we'll buy your next tag sort of situation. But I mean, to Andy Nimrod's point, we live in a place where hunting is an easy option, right? So
What about for what if we tried to get Luther students who grew up hunting? No, I'm serious, and offered them, you know, tried to market to Luther students. Not that you necessarily get to hunt. You could hunt in Decorah, because a lot of them probably aren't going home to hunt. But
no, they're hunting on our family's land. I mean, the students that are real hunters are hunting in Winnebago County, right? I'm personally familiar with that process. Would more of them hunt if it was not a trip north to do it? I don't know. Might be.
You know, I know Luther students come from a lot of different states too, and I wonder if is there any kind of prickly legality to having Wisconsin kids hunting, or because they're residents here, they are Iowans? But I know that out-of-state hunting is expensive in Iowa.
If they're full-time students, they can get resident license.
That's what I figured, but I wanted to make sure. I do think there would be some interest, you know, if there are students living in the residence halls and they can just walk up above Baker Village, or if they can go over to Roseland Woodlands or over to the Norski area. I mean, that's actually pretty desirable hunting land if it were allowed.
Does Luther have an issue with guns being on campus? Because I know they've always had students store guns. Are you talking about archery or firearms?
Oh, I'm talking about archery. I don't think firearms within the city would
No
be.
firearms in town, yeah, no.
Well, and that was one of the concerns before, is that Luther wasn't real open to hunting on their land, and that had been a stumbling block a couple of years ago.
So I talked to the land use committee about it, and I think they're willing to talk about it, especially if we knew that, like, we're gonna block off 2 weeks. And I think land use, I think Molly McNichol is interested in trying to figure out how to do this. The deer are problematic in a number of ways, and sort of elevating into concern, I think, at Luther. We have a new president.
I think that's a good conversation, Emily. I think before Molly was interested, but she wasn't getting much traction on campus.
I think the other thing that we all need to recognize is chronic wasting in our county, and that thinning the herd is not just an issue of eating my zinnias. It's now an issue that it's a biodiversity issue. So I would happily welcome more discussion in a short period of time on how do we get this done, to Johanna's point, that we don't wait until fall.
Were there other landowners besides Luther that we should pull? I mean, maybe we want to have like a joint city community committee look at this, right? So we would probably want to be in discussion with Luther at the table, but were there other landowners that we had that we maybe want to invite to have this conversation? Or is it really just Luther and the city?
No, I think, we can, between Andy and other staff, myself, we can reach out to some of the larger landowners. Some of them will be engaged in the process, and some of them, depending on the approach, may not want to be involved in the process. But we can generate that list and get them back to the table.
And I would encourage, I mean, I know that this is a crazy time. We got COVID going on, you're swamped, Andy's swamped. So I wonder if you can lead on the council a little bit to help these conversations, and maybe not a bunch of staff. Maybe you could appoint 1 or 2 staff members to be on the committee, but I'm trying to think, how do we alleviate some of this, and just to get the ball rolling and conversations going?
Sure. Yeah,
And so what's coming up for me tonight is maybe partly it's the city to say, hey, we've tried this process for 3 years, a little bit of interest this past year. Here are the pros and cons we know about. Would you be open to extending what we're trying into your land areas, or something like that? I mean, I think maybe there's some step to asks here, whereas it felt sort of vague and scary when no one had started to do any sort of loosening up of expectations.
Okay.
It's a perfect social distancing class. Why not have PE be hunting this year?
Right.
And Decorah High School students can actually, each one of them can take out a deer.
So it does bring up another pinch point, is right now lockers are swamped because they have, people are butchering hogs that they can't get to market. And to call a locker right now and try and get work done, I know people that called within the last 2 days, and the earliest they could get meat into Edgewood was May of 2021. And in Jets and Wakan, it was January of 2021. And so not everybody, especially Luther students, would have a place to deal with a deer. And we don't have a local locker anymore. And that's another problem is how could the city help if you had some hunters that are willing just to whack a bunch of deer, one of the problems for them would be getting rid of them and what to do with them. So I'm not offering a suggestion. That's another part of the problem. So
Doesn't Park Rec offer processing classes? Andy, I heard that's on our next year's schedule.
we have the staff that could teach that.
And we have
I'll
a
leave it at
certified
that.
community kitchen.
Yeah, but I think, and like I said, that's kind of, it's ironic that we talk about it because of COVID. That there's people in Iowa that could use that food, and trying to, we have the food, and there's people that need it. It's figuring out how to get it to them.
Actually, using Spectrum, I wonder about a conversation with Mike Merrick. If there were people who would volunteer their time to process a deer in community kitchen, get it to the food pantry, it could be a really innovative program. I wonder if we could get a grant on it. I mean, for a city managed deer management program.
And just grind it all.
Yeah.
Grind it all up, make deer meat, hamburgers.
Yeah, I wonder what the USDA would, say about having unlicensed, product going to any kind of kitchen.
Yeah, I think I'd try and work with a locker on it.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, I assume that even if we work with a locker, they're going to have to test the deer. I mean, they're going to want to know if they had chronic wasting.
Yeah, but I think
Yeah,
the licensing
testing
is
is
different
getting
for
more available.
processing than, yeah. It would be very Decorah to figure it out. Okay.
Unfortunately, the DNR is only interested in making money on this instead of helping us with our deer deprivation. The best plan I've ever seen was Minnesota DNR back in the 80s up in the apple orchards around La Crescent, where you bought a tag and you got a dual tag. You had to shoot 2 does and take them in, and then you got an any sex deer after that. And in 2 seasons, the deer herd was down to where it was manageable, not doing damage.
That would be awesome.
But get the DNR to go along with a true deprivation plan is very, very difficult. Even when we had our local representation, they didn't want to consider that.
Yeah, and it was, some of their rules were counterintuitive too. So if you're a private landowner, you own land, abutting some of our parkland, like some of the large landowners we're talking about, they aren't allowed under the DNR program to even take an animal from their own property for the first year, which I find absolutely ridiculous, especially if the program is to, for deer depredation. Odd.
Yes.
That's the hard part, and that's why some of the larger landowners weren't willing to participate. Well, we'll pull some things together here. I think one of the important pieces, though, will be to try to get some of the landowners and/or Luther at the table, and that may help with some additional brainstorming or thought generation.
Great. Awesome. Chad, you've talked a couple of times at the council table about the junk vehicle code amendment coming our way, but do you mind doing just a quick refresher of the recommendations you're making to us?
Yeah, and I did put a draft ordinance in your Dropbox. It's 820, 8.20, amending the code related to junk vehicles. Ultimately, what my frustration is, and maybe it's only my frustration, but I drive around town, I see junk cars. So for me, junk cars, right? But it legitimately are vehicles that are sitting in back alleys, sitting behind garages. They haven't been driven in years, sometimes longer. And the only reason that they are allowed to remain is simply because they're licensed. And I think, junk vehicles, abandoned vehicles, just the car that's sitting behind the garage with weeds growing around it is an attractive nuisance. It draws people, maybe in an unsafe way. Kids play on them. It certainly harbors rodents and pests and and what other vermin. And I think just merely being able to license a vehicle and have it sit there for years on end is not a way that we want to protect the health and safety of our community. So with John's help, I'm proposing this ordinance change that looks at making it easier to get rid of those types of vehicles. It still does provide for some level of storage, not much. Frankly, if your car's sitting beside your garage and it's got weeds growing around it, probably needs to go. But if it's on a hard surface, if it's in a storage yard or a storage area, then you can keep it. Otherwise, I just think we have too many of these things sitting around. I have one just off of Mechanic and Pearl. Frankly, it's across from my house. That's not the reason, but I look at it every day. It's a later model Pontiac. It was wrecked, and the whole front end is gone, and it has been sitting there for at least 2 or 3 years, and the only reason it continues to sit there is because it's licensed. But it's inoperable, and the front end, half the front end is missing. And I just think we need to consider changing that code.
Well, Chad, it's a classic.
Yeah, okay. It was my high school car, and I'm going to fix it up, right?
Right, I'm sure you hear all the excuses.
Oh, yeah.
In reading through what you put forward in the Dropbox, I found it very all-encompassing and dealing with where the issue is, and I would support us changing the ordinance.
Does it have any impact on recreational vehicles or like old trailers, old campers, that kind of thing?
I guess I haven't really looked at it with that eye. Are you thinking recreational type vehicles, or do you have something in particular in mind, or?
I just think there are a few instances where people are storing an old, camper trailer, like the one in my backyard that I look at. It's not a problem for me because it's in reasonably good shape, but it hasn't moved for 2 years. And I don't know if someone's going to restore it. It's just a little 12-foot camper. And I see a few of those things here and there, old Winnebagos, that kind of thing that just sit and don't move.
So I think, this doesn't necessarily touch on like the trailer type thing, but if it's a vehicle that has a motor, then it's going to hit on that. I'm looking at the definition of junked or obsolete motor vehicle or machinery means any motor vehicle or machinery.
Chad, would the, under number 2, a motor vehicle that has remained illegally on public property? Never mind.
Now, Chad, is this something that we would be looking for or something that would have to be reported? Like, are we proactively going to search these out, or is this something you're going to have to get a complaint for a neighbor in order to act, or what are you thinking?
Well, generally, the way it works now is either, any staff or the police department sees something, I see something. I mean, we're all enforcement officers, so if we see it, we can respond to it. We do take complaints, if the neighbor calls, just like Kirk mentioned, maybe something in his neighborhood, we would respond to that as well. The key is whether we're seeking them out or we find them as enforcement officers or the public calls them in, it still has to meet the definitions and the parameters defined in the code, right? So it really isn't about notification. Hey, my battery's running low here. Chop, you got a plug? I know the chief and his team respond to vehicles often. Wanda and I'll write letters. Occasionally we get the complaints from residents. It's kind of a mix of different ways that we're notified of them, right? I wouldn't necessarily, even with the tools of this code, all of a sudden jump in the Jeep and start driving around and writing down addresses. I don't have time for that. That's not going to be my end game here. But I want to be able to respond to the ones that are causing problems or that people have called to complain about.
Sure.
Chief, do you have any comments on this? I know this impacts you and your department as well. Thank you.
I would agree with you on the reporting issue. It comes in a couple different manners. If we're driving around and we keep seeing the same issues, an officer will call up and try to rectify the situation by the city sending them a letter. It's no different than we drive around and if we see lawns that are unkept or any other ordinances like that, that we report as well. I'm in agreement that we have to have something laid out so that when there does come a time for us to address it, the steps are right there to do it. So I'm in agreement with the update of this code.
Do you see anything in the code that's kind of subjective that needs to be cleaned up, or that maybe where it could be, I'm just going to move this car across the street for a week and then move it back to the other side of the street? Or is that, you know what I mean? Is there going to be some?
Yeah, we've had that conversation. Chad and I have talked about this code before, and that was one of the conversations we had is how do we address the issue of, as Chad said right now, if it's currently registered, it can sit for as long as you want to sit, even if it doesn't have tires on it. And the other excuse that comes up all the time is, well, I've moved my vehicle last week, and technically they have because they moved it a foot. So that was an issue that we wanted to address, and I'm not sure if that is addressed in this updated one.
Well, so I think the difference is going to be between sitting on public or private property, and of course we have different tools, I think, at our disposal for something sitting on public property, such as a street or an alleyway or a parking lot or something like that. I would say otherwise, if you would look at the end of the draft ordinance here, section 130 talks about provisions, basically exceptions. The provisions of this chapter would not apply to junk or obsolete motor vehicles or machinery stored within a garage or other enclosed structure, auto salvage yard or junkyard licensed by the city. We don't have any of those. Or a fully enclosed fence or wall at least 8 feet tall, provided there are not more than 3 vehicles stored on any parcel. So it does provide some relief, I think, for those legitimate situations where, maybe it is a classic car or something like that, I suppose. So I'd draw your attention to that. There was another section, I think, that we tweaked a little bit here, and I'm not seeing it right now. Had to do with a time frame.
How would we handle East Side Body, for example?
Well, that kind of storage down there is, that's part of their business. So that would be allowed per the zoning for that type of business. I know the challenge down there is he has cars stored on the other side of Sumner that look like they're in the park, but he really owns that land. So that's part of his business.
Is there a provision if someone has, I think about Luther faculty who go away, but maybe they have a second car that sort of sits there while they're gone. I saw that there was, storage, you can get a 14-day extension, but could a person come down to the city and say, hey, I'm going to be gone for a semester. Here's my car. It may sit there. Someone's going to run it every now and then, but just to make sure it works, but it's not going to leave the slot.
Right, or the parking space or something like that. Well, if it's on a hard surface, so if it's sitting in the driveway, still I'm not able to find that section I want to reference there in terms of that time limit. I
think the time limit was 30 days.
It's 30 days and it's section 90, so I just found that. Section 90, it's declared that the storage or parking of obsolete or junk motor vehicles or machinery within the corporate limits for a period in excess of 30 days, unless accepted by 2030, which are the exemptions that we just read, constitutes a threat. So, there would be that 30-day provision there, I guess. I don't know if there's any other provision here for the chief or the city manager to be able to make some kind of an exception in the case that you've noted, Emily. if somebody's going to be gone for the semester and that's 3 months, you know, what do we do?
They put it at Luther in long-term parking.
Right. We could revisit that and just make sure we're clean on that scenario there. What might be some situations we can deal with that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we just step away from the moment and read this policy, if we'd actually see a concern about the issue that you laid out there, Emily, because so much of the definition of this section is about obsolete, junked, abandonment, right? And really all of the descriptive terminology of things that would raise concern. The only thing about like your working Honda Civic from, you know, is that it's been sitting in the same place for too long, right? So,
I mean, the reason I bring it up is because, so I have both a junk car next to me and then my neighbor who goes away for very long periods of time. So you can actually see the two cars sitting there for months at a time. And I would hate to see my neighbor get a, you know, junk car's ticket when that is her car, literally, but she's gone in Norway for a while. And then my other neighbor whose car just sits there. It'd be very difficult to tell those two cars apart, but there's very different reasons why they sit there.
Well, so to Johanna's point, in section 90, it's declared that the storage or parking of obsolete or junked motor vehicles. So the first thing you do is go look at the definition of obsolete or junked, right? And if somebody has a working, you know, Volvo that's there because they're, you know, in Europe for 2 months, it probably isn't meeting the definition of junked or obsolete.
Okay.
I guess, I know we also have a muffler ordinance. And I know it says tailpipe, but I guess I'd like the word muffler.
What section are you in, Ross?
Let's see, I saw tailpipe somewhere. Hold on. Section B, number 1.
in definitions, I think, yeah.
I see it.
Instead of tailpipe, I would like it to say the word muffler, because muffler is actually already referenced in ordinances. And wouldn't be subjective.
Okay.
What if someone doesn't have the means to get rid of a vehicle?
Looks like we take care of that.
Is that in there? Do we charge them?
Well, I think at the furthest extent of that, and the chief will have a little better knowledge of how this works, is that we would tow it, and then it becomes property of the chief, and with proper notice, storage for a period of time, he could then dispose of it. Either by city auction or calling the local junk dealer down the street. Chief, I don't know how you normally get rid of cars like that. I know you do it occasionally, but it's infrequent, a couple times a year maybe.
It is. We're doing it right now with a trailer that was left on private property, which is a different set of rules we have to follow, but normally we'll throw them in the auction block. And there's a lengthy process that goes with that. We follow the recommendations of the city attorney.
Well, I just wondering too, because it says the failure or remove of repair of motor vehicle or machinery is directed to or to request a hearing within the time prescribed will be sufficient cause for its abatement and or removal by the city at the owner's cost. So that's where I was wondering. I mean, if it's someone who's, I mean, are we picking on low income individuals here is my question, I guess. And if they don't have the means, do we want to kick people while they're down is my
Right.
If they don't have the means to fix up an abandoned vehicle, they don't have the means. I mean, I don't know how you can placate that anyway.
Then I'm asking on top of that, then do we charge them as well for that?
What are we talking, a towing fee?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. What does that mean here?
Tow fee and impound fees.
What does that typically run, Chief?
Chief, do you
What's
have an
that?
idea what that typically runs? A couple $100?
Tow fee, it depends on the vehicle, how many tires are up, how deep it is in the mud and the muck and the dirt, what kind of vehicle it is. I'm guessing you could probably average that to be about $100 for a tow fee.
I've kind of heard too lately that junk cars, in terms of their metal, recycling value, aren't worth much either right now.
That's something I've talked to Chad about too, and we discussed this code section it's not that we're going to kick somebody while they're down, but are we going to get taken advantage of? I can't afford to get rid of that Pontiac sitting in my backyard. If I let the weeds go up around it, the city's going to take care of it for me, and then we incur all the costs of it.
I can see both sides. I just, it's an interesting dilemma. And I think with COVID and unemployment rates soaring and things of that nature, I'm assuming the economy is going to be great here for the foreseeable future. That's a tough call. I mean, I want to say maybe we should pick up the tab because in a way we're winning as well because we're making the city look nicer and obviously removing hazards. But at the same time, Chief, I understand too, you don't want to get taken advantage of. Maybe we split the cost. How about
I was just looking here and usually these types of things would then become a municipal infraction if we tow it and send them a bill or something like that, or whatever those impound fees might be. And those would be, if they're not paid in a reasonable amount of time, they're assessed against the property taxes of their residents. Now, obviously, that only applies if they're actually a property owner. If they're just a tenant or something like that, that's harder to do.
That is an interesting question. Who is it, the tenant? So if it's a rental place, is it the tenant that's in trouble or the owner?
Well, usually for other types of nuisance abatements, I will send notice to both to seek compliance. For example, I just had 2 properties that I sent notice for failure to obtain a building permit for decks. And I sent it to both the tenant and the property owner for compliance. So in one case, the tenant filled out the compliance certificate and sent the payment fee, and the other, the landowner did.
I'll be down tomorrow to pick up an application to put on a new deck.
Much appreciated.
And the fence around your camper too.
I'll complain about your camper, Kurt.
I mean, I feel better knowing that there's sort of like a, you wouldn't have to pay it all at once. You could pay over time if this happens. That feels better to me.
Yeah.
I just want to repeat, my neighbor's camper is not a problem. Neither is my neighbor.
I don't know, but there's a really awesome old junk car at the end of Palisades when you come down that trail, like really old, 100% rust. It's awesome. Don't get rid of it.
Yeah, that one's considered art, right?
Thank you.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes there's that disconnect between like we have this car, maybe we get rid of it. We know it's going to cost money. That's a lot of work. I've had to junk a couple of cars in the last couple of years, and we took way too long to do both of them. Most recently, the tow fee was the exact amount that we got selling the steel, right? So it was a wash in the end, but it took a whole bunch of days, weeks, months to just like make the phone call to get the tow truck to come, right? And so I do feel like sometimes a nudge of, hey, it's really time is good. And also that there is that potential to have like a little resale value to balance out expenses. It doesn't always work, but the middle way I'm hoping for.
Is John still on?
No, I was looking for him. I don't see him. I'll revisit the cost and fee section with him. Maybe the chief and John and I can get together on what that might look like.
Yeah, I guess I would also like missing radio aerials and decorative pieces. You know, although not subjective, I guess I'd like to see it be more vehicles that are in no way street legal. You know, currently, you know, missing a wheel, tire, motor, transmission, that's pretty evident. But if somebody were to complain, that we could say, take this to a shop and remedy it by making it street legal. You know?
Well, that's always an option. Absolutely.
Right.
If they want to make a road worthy,
right.
You know, I think all or certainly most of the items in that B1 paragraph do relate directly to street or road worthiness. Chief, maybe you'd comment there. I mean, if you've got a broken windshield, a window, a headlight, taillight, doors, you know, any of that kind of stuff, that's road worthiness right there. You're probably going to get stopped and have a conversation if any of those things are wrong in yard driving down the road.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's not subjective, so that, you know, so that it's easy for enforcement, it's easy for the public, it's easy for the shop owner to be like, this is what it's going to take to make this not a junk vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What do we do then about people who restore cars or have these pet projects that do work? I mean, I know some people who restore cars and they, you know, it might take them a couple of years to do it. And sometimes it might sit for 6 months before they start working on it.
Get it in a fenced in backyard or get it in a garage.
Okay. Fair enough.
Aside from that, I think it looks good, and I appreciate your efforts, Chad.
Thank you.
And Chief.
A lot of input from others. So
I have one other question. What about if it was a fenced-in garage, a fenced-in backyard, or a car cover?
like a carport kind of thing?
Well, not a carport, but like you put a blanket over your, you know, like one of those car covers.
Right.
Tarps.
Like a. Although tarps are going to look not necessarily help with the what you're achieving.
I know I was thinking about that because my uncle has a real nice car under a car cover in his yard, right? But if you take the cover off, there is a beautiful vintage car, right? So if you take it off and there's a car that's never going to run for 30 years, are we any happier? I mean, I think it should still hit the obsolete car.
Yeah, blue and brown ripped tarps.
Right.
Yeah, leave it. Never mind.
Okay. All right, we'll tweak a few things here based on these comments. You want to see it again, or I mean, if we bring it back to you as a first reading, certainly you can make changes as we go. So you know.
First reading, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm comfortable having it come back as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I keep muting and then realizing I'm supposed to like shepherd us to the next discussion. So we've had the last council meeting and I think everyone's received a couple of emails from citizens around noise violations and particularly the racetrack. So it means it's spring in Decorah. I think I'm just opening this up for our annual discussion about how to balance our citizens' peace and expectations of their neighborhood and the fact that we have a racetrack in town.
I'll jump in.
I can start with a.
I think it was unfortunate what happened. But had we had a normal spring without the COVID and that, they would have had 2 or 3 nights of racing prior to that practice day. It would have been nice if the practice day would have been announced better. I know years back when we were talking about this, I had just as many people from the west side of town complaining about summer noise and fall noise from coming from the college with festival, Dorian Fest, with orientation, with football practice at 6 a.m. and whistles and blowhorns going. I think one thing we just got to remember is we live in a very vibrant community, or we want to be in a vibrant community. We're going to have some noise, and we've established a pretty good working relationship with the fair board and the promoters at that track, that they're not going till 10:30, 11:30 like they did 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, they're done usually by 9:30 at night on Saturday nights when they do have racing. They've cut it back to what, twice a month, Chief? Dave, is it twice a month they're doing it? Racing?
I thought it was weekly. That's what it
No,
feels like.
I thought they switched it because they're going between here and Cresco. They run both tracks, I thought. Or at least when Todd and Chuck were running it, they did.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was one way they helped curb the complaints down here, was cutting the number of races down to half and then going over to Cresco for the other half.
What if we could just enter into some sort of memorandum of understanding for communication and whatnot with the fair board and with the promoter? You know, I don't think it's malicious, like Randy said. I just think that having something written, kind of like what Chief said with the 2080, having something in writing versus a gentleman's agreement, because of changes in council and changes of promoters and changes of the fair board, things just change. And it might just be good to have something drawn up.
I thought we had something in writing, Chad, that had 10 o'clock for the stop time on the races.
No, I'm not aware of anything, Randy. If we do have something, it would have been a case-by-case or a year-by-year situation, but I'm not aware of anything current.
Okay.
Yeah, I think,
No, you go
I
ahead.
think just like, yeah, to Randy's point, I think that this came up more intense this year because it was a sort of a surprise. It was two days, afternoon times, while the community is concerned about gathering, right? So there were a lot of factors. I very much appreciated the Speedway's response back to the neighbors. I feel like everything is indicating that communication is possible between parties, and I would be really happy to support communication and not come in like we don't want the races, right? Because I don't think that's the intention. I think it's, hey, we sort of have established mutual understanding that this is Saturday night. What about, let's discuss the appropriateness of the surprise when there was something much beyond Saturday nights happening.
Yeah, I think I was going to echo that. I mean, I thought that the response from the Speedway was great. I think that they seemed to honor what the neighbors were saying. But I also agree with Ross that it worked out well for us and our neighbors this time. But it would be nice if there was just a memorandum of understanding or a 28E agreement. I think you're right. Everybody knows the races are on Saturday night, but if it starts to be more, and the owner indicated, or the new promoter indicated, he can essentially use the track whenever he wants to within their agreement. So it might be good to have that discussion.
Just for what it's worth, I called him up after we had that last discussion on noise. And he was very receptive to discussion. He was going to run practices at next week again on Saturday and Sunday, but he realized what happened and he doesn't want to upset people either. So he canceled the practices for one day and just ran them just on the Saturday. So he's open to discussions. And we asked him to get us a schedule, maybe if they're going to start running them again. That way we can get ahead of it. And he said he's more than happy to do that as well. And he understood that he maybe went about it in a wrong manner by not getting that information out. But we had a really good conversation.
Yeah. So I
Thank you, Chief. Go ahead.
I think that, thank you as well, but I think that it's just a failure to communicate often, and just having some expectations in writing, so that citizens can say, okay, I know the races are going to be Saturday from to or if we have a rain reschedule, that we're going to communicate that far enough in advance, right? I don't think it's too much to ask just to have some general ground rules in place.
It would be interesting to talk to the Edie's and see what they had set up too, because they had special events they ran from time to time, and they were always good about the information sharing. I wonder if they had a contract that we could cut and paste instead of reinventing the wheel.
Now Chuck's in the meeting right now. We could ask him.
Todd?
No, we didn't have any type of contract or anything.
I think it brings up a couple of things. One is we've talked about noise for a couple of other issues, and sometimes it is really about this communication, right? Can you notify, Speedway's schedule is up for 2020, right? We can know every Saturday night to expect if we live in a world where COVID allows it, right? So something about how do we communicate to the public, which I think is their responsibility, but communicate to us sort of as people who are going to hear the complaint so we have a fair answer for anything that's not on that posted schedule. I think that would be my goal in some of this, and then also just to approach it in a way to say that the doorway is open for communication to see how to make this best work. If the door's not open, we can't find out how we're being a pain, which I'm sure we are in some ways, and vice versa. So.
But the other side of the issue that it's not racetrack oriented, but it is the amount of noise in our community, and we have no real ordinance to be able to help people understand what isn't allowed. And so I think when I can hear a motorcycle turn off 52 and rock all the way to Fifth Avenue and down Fifth Avenue, and hear every gear shift, every acceleration, that is noise that isn't necessary. So I would like us to come up with some kind of ordinance to be able to address the public betterment of just noise pollution that some of these big trucks with big standpipes and large motorcycles are generating as they decide to get their rocks off accelerating through town.
Chief, I know that in the
Go ahead, Ross.
Chief, I know in the past that when noise has been talked about, that the subjectivity of noise is an issue, and that officers don't necessarily the former administration wasn't necessarily supportive of a decibel-based ordinance because of enforcement. What are your feelings?
It's always been a sticking point of mine. I remember when I was working more of a patrol responsibility, they're saying we're supposed to stop motor vehicles that would wrap off their pipes or would get on it, like Steve said. And then we turn around and there's a motorcycle that goes by us, and that's the standard equipment for them, and we let them go. It's kind of a juxtapose. What do you do? How do you enforce one and not the other one? Because one's a motorcycle and one's a truck. So that's always been a sticking point. As far as the decibel level, I don't know, is there a motorcycle in town that's going to be able to operate down a city street and be within the range of a decibel level?
I would think so.
Well, in the sample ordinance that I'd sent out to the council a couple of weeks ago touches on that a little bit, but again, there's a couple of technical aspects of that are challenging. One, you need to have the appropriate calibrated and certified decibel meter. You have to take the reading at the receiving property. and you have to have some level of enforcement officer trained in how to read that meter. And then, obviously the ordinance I sent you was pretty complex in terms of different zones, different types of noise, different hours of the day. That would be one extreme in terms of putting together a pretty comprehensive matrix of unacceptable noises to, I think ours is at the other extreme. It's very subjective. Is there something in the middle? Maybe. I don't know right now what that might look like, but the key is that enforcement.
Steve, this wouldn't cover music or I guess Randy, this wouldn't cover music or whistles or anything like that. But I know when I had a Harley, my Harley had stock pipes on it versus like, I think they're Screaming Eagle. Forgive me if I'm wrong, motorcycle aficionados, but it's like glass packs for your truck or pipes that are designed to be noisy. And you're going to get the motorcyclists that say loud bikes save lives and all those things. But if we do just look at our muffler ordinance, and we don't allow glass packs on trucks or straight pipes, or Screaming Eagle pipes on bikes, it's not subjective. It's equipment based that way. And then with music, I think again, a memorandum of understanding of hours that are acceptable, or maybe having a community-based noise ordinance where certain times would trigger different things. Because if you're driving your Harley down Winneshiek on a beautiful sunny day versus 12 o'clock at night, it's different, right?
The other thing to do in terms of ordinances is if you're going to permit noise, well, then there's a fee for that permit to be able to generate that noise, whether it's a racetrack or a music concert or whatever. And then you have an understanding because they filled out the permit and they've got the hours and it's all set and institutionalized, if you will.
What are other communities our size, our nature, like what's out there? Do you know, Chad, in terms of, I don't know, I was thinking Pella, Lanesboro. I'm not sure who would we compare ourselves to, but in terms of a small community, tourist, small college, I'm just curious if it's common to have a noise ordinance, not common, what kind of ordinances they have related to that.
It'll be common to have something, probably more than ours. Ours is pretty subjective. But again, it's, if ours is on the low end and the one I sent you a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago is on the other end, there's everything in between. But it still comes down to enforcement. No matter what you have or what community standards you have, even if you permit certain noises like parties or concerts or races, you still have those things that are not permitted. The trucks that come through town, the motorcycles that come through, and how do you enforce those type of things that are more outside some kind of standard or box, right?
Chief, would that be something that you and your staff would be comfortable looking at and maybe coming up with some suggestions on, since you're the ones that have to enforce, would that be something that you'd be comfortable coming up with or reviewing what other cities are doing, or talking to other police departments that have to enforce, and how we can kind of mesh the two worlds of having no code versus having some code?
Yeah, to answer the first part of that, I think it'd be an enforcement nightmare. Secondly, there's a message board that I belong to for the Chiefs of Police Association for the state of Iowa. And I'll get on there tomorrow and pose that question, see what we get for response.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's great.
Can you expand on that, Chief, as far as that being a nightmare, or however you phrase that?
I think it goes back to my statement that when I was younger, they told me stop every pickup truck that goes through town with an aftermarket muffler on them, write them a ticket for noise disturbance, but then turn the other cheek when the motorcycle goes by, because that's the way a motorcycle operates. And I think Ross touched on it with his Harley. I guess, do you think that the normal straight out of the storeroom Harley is going to fall underneath that decibel level that somebody can ride their Harley through town? Or is that going to fall into, no, you can't drive your motorcycle through Decorah?
What if we attach the time? So what if it isn't like a decibel at all? Or if it's like, you can't operate something at a consistent noise level for a certain amount of time. Then any kind of driving by is actually.
Yeah, that's the way I kind of view it right now, and I have throughout my career, is that motorcycle goes by, it's loud, it's disruptive, in a second it's gone. Is that worth us trying to track somebody down? Is that worth us? Motorcycles are a lot faster than our squad cars are, so I think if you light somebody up with the top lights, do we run the risk of them taking off for a noise complaint? So I hate it personally when I walk through downtown with my wife, my kids, or whatnot, and everything downtown echoes because of the buildings and the valley. So you're walking downtown with your wife, you're trying to have a conversation, somebody goes by on a motorcycle and wraps off the pipe. You got to quit talking. It's disruptive to the ear canal. I don't like it any more than anybody else does, but in a moment it's gone. That's my enforcement kind of nightmare of it.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, I do think there's a difference between that quick and done as opposed to ongoing noise. But what that looks like, again, without knowing policies or how other towns are doing it, it's hard to comment on.
And some of it might just be outreach and education. How many tickets we'll know with our new CAD, but we probably don't know now how many tickets we've written in the last decade on jake braking. I would guess none. Yet we have signs at the beginning of, coming down in the valleys that air brakes, this is a non-air brake zone, or however it's worded. And not that we need another sign in our community, but I think that letting people know, if we do change our code, I think education and outreach will go a long way.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think overall, I'm hearing a couple of things. One, it would be helpful to communicate with our partners at the Fair Board and the Speedway. And then in general, we would be interested in seeing some example ordinances that are sort of the middle way between our current noise ordinance and the more strict option that Chad has shared previously. That's sort of where our discussion is going.
Yeah, and I want a new sign in Decorah that says, please wear a mask, don't idle, please don't make a lot of noise.
Right by the welcome sign.
Yeah.
And don't park your junk car here.
And don't park your junk car here.
And clean
All right,
air.
I'm
And clean air.
official, and I'm officially handing this over to Emily for our next committee meeting.
Okay, thanks for the conversation. That's a good conversation. We'll pull some things together and get back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you. Somebody wake Emily up.
No, I knew that was coming. It was that I was sitting in that chair. My back was about to I've been sitting there forever. Zoom call after Zoom call. And I'm like, if I don't get somewhere comfy, I'm going to lose my mind.
I got nervous. I didn't know if you were going to the restroom and you're bringing your device with you. We've all seen that video.
I had to leave for a while to pull the pizza out of the oven.
I know. It's time to switch from my day jammies to my night jammies. That's all I have to say.
Well, the pizza sounds good, so we need to keep moving. So the next item, Emily or Mayor Borowski there, I see you're back on now. You must have gotten your pizza already too.
I've been listening the whole time. So it's
Chapter
good to be
216 and 248 make amendments to the police department and the city manager code, especially reflecting reporting of the police chief through the chain of command through the city manager. That's what those two sections are basically reviewing. And I'll let the mayor kind of jump in a little bit here too. This is something that came up maybe twice in the last couple of years. Once when the council was starting to look at some changes in the fire department and the reporting structure in the fire department. And then again, last fall through the police chief recruiting and hiring process. Changes to 216 were reflected in comments from the consultant, Jeff Kaler. Is somebody bouncing around here because the screen keeps changing? Yeah, all right. And so that's kind of what precipitated this draft of this code and these code amendments tonight.
I think when I looked at it, of course, the current one has the mayor making the appointment, but there's beyond just that, there's not a lot of guidance as far as I know that everything is within the police department. I think that it would be good to have somebody besides just the mayor working with the police department that is not in an elected official. But in this case, the recommendation is working with the city manager. Now, there's a lot of discussion on it. I know Dave will relate what his feelings are for it as well. So I want to make sure we have a lot of discussion as far as changing this. I think the one thing I had to kind of give John, I'll give it to John, but when I got to part B where it said the city manager has the power to prescribe and promulgate personnel, and I thought, what the heck does that mean? But basically it would be having the city city manager would be assist with supervision of the police department of sorts. So it makes it a little more clear. Chad, maybe you can explain it a little better than I just did.
No, Mayor, I think you did a fine job, and certainly we want the chief to weigh in on this as well. I think the comments coming from Jeff Kaler, the consultant, he had heard a couple of comments, and I hear this from time to time around the state with my colleagues as well, is just the difference between having the police chief report to an elected official that maybe can be subject more to the political whims of the community rather than being under more stable professional management. And I know Jeff Kaler received a couple of comments or questions about that process during the hiring process back in August. And as I said, we kind of looked at it at that time, but then we just tucked it in the folder and didn't do anything else with it. So that's really the heart of the matter. As Dave and I have talked through this, we've had the benefit of having really stable elected officials over the years. And so it's hard to envision, what might be even beyond Lorraine's or mine or Dave's tenures here. But those are really some of the issues driving, why any city might look at some of these kinds of changes is, elected officials can have just different perspectives on why they might even run for mayor if they've got a vendetta against the police department or the fire department or even the chief. So it's really nothing more than that. And I think Lorraine and I and Dave certainly acknowledge that things are going well right now, so why rock the boat? Why make changes? But it is something that has been discussed and was recommended by your consultant, and so we put the amendment in front of you tonight.
The background notes indicate that something of this sort might also apply to code compliance. Is that going to be somehow added into this amendment, proposed amendment, or is it actually two separate issues?
What do you mean by code compliance? I guess I don't know what you're referring to there. Is it something in this code section or something else I wrote somewhere else?
Oh, no, again, sorry, I just read quickly. It's just the overview of Public Safety Committee.
Dave, do you want to make some comments on what you're thinking with this?
Yeah, is everybody comfortable? Might take a little bit. You got battery life? No, like Chad said, I've spoken to him about this a couple times, and one of my first comments was kind of what he discussed too. If something's not broke, why would we fix it? Don't rock the boat when things are working well. I understand that we look down the road, and I said that earlier when I talked about our CAD RMS 2080 agreement. My battery's almost dead. Come with me.
Mine was too. I had to call IT.
Feel like I'm on MTV Cribs. This is my stairwell.
That's the first time the meeting
Welcome to the kitchen.
We're all going to get loopy here pretty soon. I think we're about to lose it.
We just redid the floors.
Shoes.
Does have his jeans on though.
Just redid the floors. Enjoy those. My computer shut off. I thought I lost you.
If you're going to work in your wife's office, just be careful. You got to share.
She's got the nice office. I'm stuck in the basement.
You really are taking a tour of your house. This is pretty fun.
No.
The beautiful world of Zoom.
There's proof I'm wearing pants to these meetings.
Now you get to sit in. Now you get to sit on the floor and talk to us, huh?
I'm in favor of keeping things the way they are. I think we've got a good system right now. I spoke to Chad about that too, that if I've got questions, I go up the hallway. Chad's there, Wanda's there for references. We work with the city attorney's office too for oversight as well. When they said it protects me in case of a mayor coming in that's got a vendetta against police. It's funny that Chad was talking about elected officials, and you're all elected officials. So there really is no difference there too. If we get a city manager that doesn't like the police officers or the police department, am I protected there? No, because now he's my boss. So I kind of like the way things are right now. And again, if a mayor comes in that has a vendetta, it could be a 4-year term. If a city manager and the chief don't get along, how long is that term? And my other chain of thoughts went away when the computer crashed.
What's the, again, I have other communities, what's the sort of model out there for communities our size, relationships?
You know, I think for us on our size, and Chief, I know you'll have some comments on this too. I think for cities our size, we're kind of right on that cusp of, you know, status quo, the way we have it today, would probably be the situation for half the cities our size and all of them smaller. But the other half our size and bigger, it would be the way that we're proposing it.
Yeah, I told Chad too, there's a lot of uncertainty in there too for me that right now, if I'm working on a budget, and we change things up and the city manager comes down and goes, well, I'm going to do your budget this year because it says here in black and white I can. Or we get to a promotional phase and I'm working through it and the city manager sits down and goes, I'm going to take over the promotional phase because right here in black and white it says I can. So there's a lot of hesitation on that aspect for me as well.
How about just, I mean, Chad, your workload is huge. I mean, so there's a little part of me that's like, do you need one more thing? But
well, you know, so I think just the answer to that is Dave and I do work well together. I've worked well with the police department in the past, Nixon. So I think from a practical standpoint, we're already doing a lot of these things, right? Yeah, there are some things he's reporting to the mayor too, or that he's doing more autonomously. But otherwise, I think just from the practical standpoint, we're already doing what we do. So.
I would also add, I think, with the reduction of duties for planning and zoning, that'll free Chad up quite a bit, I think, for the administrative role that he's paid to do.
For practicality, I mean, Dave would be running the department similar to the other departments, but it's the use of Chad being the go-to person, I would think.
Yeah, and one thing Dave and I talked about too, he asked me about, you know, my management style and if I micromanage and those types of things as well. And certainly I don't. I think the council probably understands that enough about me to know that I do give autonomy to the department heads. I did encourage him to go talk to other department heads just in terms of, you know, how that process works. If he does have any concerns about that, you know, Dave's new to the position and maybe hasn't worked with me as closely over the years as a department head. You know, I'm not looking to run another department. I don't run any of my current departments, I don't think. But, you know, you've got some department heads on here, so maybe they'd like to chime in on that as well. But otherwise, you know, certainly the mayor and Dave can comment more on that too.
Mayor, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I think sometimes, I mean, I think that when I looked at it, and I guess from some of the things that I've worked through, there's a question of, I know the police chief works, reports to the city council, but on a day-to-day operation, and as far as working with the city manager and as far as operational pieces are concerned, I think there could be better working along in their clear guidelines as far as between the police chief and city, but then also with the council. But the council's not as familiar with day-to-day operations of stuff. And
No, I meant your opinion on whether you would like to relinquish control because you're not familiar with a certain set of ordinances or HR policies, or whether you want to retain control because you feel like you like to retain control, right? I just didn't know what your position was.
I think I don't particularly need control over any of that, except I understand what it is. But if I look back to some mayors that we have had in the past, or people that get elected into an office would not be, just be frank, would not be as familiar with the operational pieces of the city as a whole that I have. It's a political set. And so I look for allowing the city manager to be working strongly with the police chief. I don't see it as the city manager in charge. I think the other departments run pretty smoothly. I mean, I don't see Chad or even, and I guess the only one would have been Jerry. There was no attempt to run it, but there was always the backup or check and balances with the department head and city manager when there became questions that perhaps an elected official really would not have any information or experience working with.
Thank you.
But just to
I'm
clarify,
curious if we can all have questions. So I'm just curious if so I'm interested in why the police chief reports to the mayor as separate from all of the other department heads, and wonder if there's a bit of like Iowa history lesson in moving from a mayoral to a managerial type of government, and are we somehow stuck in a quasi in between, or is this an intentional pathway that's been developed? I guess I don't have larger context in that way.
Well, Chad could probably answer that better as far as the history of the way this has been set up.
Well, I think that the genesis of it comes from, you know, the time frame or the era before many cities had city managers, right? Although city management's been around, professional management's been around for more than 100 years. Here, we've only had it about 30 years. Some of the codes at the state level that describe especially public safety, police and fire and elected officials' responsibilities over them are grounded in that state code that's been there, you know, since the state constitution was developed, right? Some of that stuff goes back that far, and it's just never been tweaked or changed or looked at. Part of what we discussed earlier is because maybe there wasn't really a need to, right?
I'd be also willing to bet that this is dependent on the size of cities. I'm sure major cities like Cedar Rapids, who have full-time mayors where it's a full-time job, you know, they probably do have that power. I'm guessing in smaller towns where we have mayors that aren't well compensated and it's not a full-time job for them, I'm sure that they're probably more dependent on the city manager for things like this. So.
Well, or again, yes, that's a good point. It goes back to, you know, what I was saying before, where, you know, the smaller cities where they don't have professional management, it relies on the mayor or elected official. We're at that cusp where, you know, between 6, 7, 8,000 to 10 or 11,000, it could go either way. Beyond that, it's going to have the reporting that we're looking at. Obviously, some cities are going to go completely to the council manager form of government, where the city manager has even the hiring and firing responsibilities. We're not asking for that here. That certainly can stay with the mayor with approval of the council, like we've had. There's no reason to change that. And certainly that gives, you know, this chief, Dave, or any other chief that protection too, that if there's a rogue city manager out there somewhere, at least it takes, you know, mayor and council consensus to do anything about, you know, weird situations.
I think what I want to make sure is, as we look at this, that we're clear as far as Dave's ability to operate that, to manage that department accordingly, and what role the city manager plays as far as assisting Dave.
Yeah, and I think the code, you know, probably is pretty clear if you'd go through it in some detail, that Dave would still maintain, you know, a lot of autonomy that some of the other departments don't even have today, right?
Chad, what about L under duties of the manager? Are in looking at our other departments, do they independently prepare and submit to the council the annual required budgets themselves? So water, street, sewer, do they do that themselves? Or do they submit that to you and you submit that to us?
They submit it to me and Wanda annually. And then, I mean, we sit down and go through it together and we present it as a staff report.
So as I'm reading this, would this be the same as we're using in other departments?
Well, it's most likely what you have currently been doing now. Dave, did you work with Wanda and Chad preparing the budget for this year?
Yeah, I did. I had a lot of questions. It was my first time going through it without a chief sitting next to me. So I had a lot of questions, and I went up and talked to Chad and Wanda.
Because I think that's the way, basically the way it has been, even with Bill, I believe, that they would work, he would work as well, or the chief would work as well with Chad and Wanda in preparing the budget, and they work back and forth, and then eventually it went to city council.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that it was, you know, if we're striving for uniformity, that this was uniform.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe the one where I'd like some clarity is on P, where it talks about city manager's power.
So Mayor, that section was something that John changed to get rid of your P words there. Promulgate, and what was the other one? I forget what.
Well,
what the other one was.
I got two people that had to look that up in the dictionary. They felt we need to change it to a more common word.
Yeah, so he took that out and said prepare, adopt, and implement instead of promulgate and whatever the other one.
Well, it's preparing personnel and financial rules and procedures and then adopting the work in order to put those in place.
Yeah. Well, and that's a lot of what, administrative staff does now is, the personnel rules, the HR policies, all of those types of things. Wanda and I work on those a lot. A lot of times we get department head input on those. It just depends on what they are and what the nature of them is, who they're impacting.
And that is, I've got you, because that's under the duties of the manager.
That's right.
And previously, well, I don't know if this wordage was in here well, I've got it here someplace. Let me look. For the manager. For the use in other. Yeah, currently it's be directly responsible to the council for administration. If it's under P, all departments of the city shall report and be responsible to the city manager. No, that must be a little different.
I find this ordinance confusing. And maybe it's just me and it's late at night.
Yeah.
This ordinance is just dealing with the police chief, correct?
No,
Police first.
if you look at the title, 216 is the police chief and 248 is the city manager.
Right.
And so to make those two congruent, there's proposed changes to both of those sections.
That is helping. Now so because here's what I'm struggling with is that in the manager's section, the duties of the manager, all of those then would then apply over the police department too, if this changes, correct?
Yes.
So in the 830 adapted version for my brain, who essentially has the ultimate responsibility for employees of the police department, the chief or the city manager?
Currently?
No, if we change. Think of like hiring, firing, disciplining, work schedules. I need time off. Would they then now go to the city manager, or do they go to?
No.
That would still be at the chief
Stay
level.
with the chief. They stay with the chief just like any other department head.
Okay.
So it's redrawing the line from chief to mayor to redrawing that current line to chief to city manager, therefore like sort of evening your tent top out.
Sort of, Johanna, except there's still a connection to the mayor in terms of, and through the council as far as hiring and firing, right? So.
Yeah.
Right, which feels important because law enforcement, the service of safety and law enforcement in our community feels distinctly different than all of the other services that we offer, right? And as a citizen, they feel sort of distinctly different. And so I do conceptually understand and accept a different organizational structure to allow for that. That feels appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part of my brain is, and I really like to have on paper what is actually happening, right? And so what actually happens on a day-to-day basis is that Chad is administratively available and a support to Dave in the office. And your first place to go to for your question is to Chad, because I love Lorraine too, but she lives up the hill and was a phone call away. If what's actually happening during the day is a lot of that like daily support connection of organizational operations to the city manager, then that makes sense to put on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I hold these two conflicting thoughts in my head, and my 830 brain is working very slowly to put them together to say, does this paper say both of those things in a way that I'm comfortable with?
Well, I think it's, you have to look at the ordinances for the police department, the way they currently are, and for the city manager, the way they currently are, and then look at the proposal and then see how that fits. But I see exactly what you're saying as far as how it would look, where Dave would be going for questions and working with Chad, but Dave has full ownership, or I should say the police chief has full ownership of the police department. Chad, in turn, is responsible for going to the city council. So the way you just explained it is the way I see it, but I think you have to look carefully at the way the wordage is set out, so it's clear for everybody on where that department head's responsibility is. I'll put it that way.
Maybe this would help. Dave, can you give me some examples of like how you work with Lorraine and what she's providing that now you would go to Chad for instead?
Yeah, let me just go back to what Joanna said at the end, that she's got the two brains that she's having trouble making a connection. That's a big part of what I said earlier. There's a lot of unknown, and that makes me nervous. I don't want to get into a promotional process 2-3 years down the road and then have somebody come in and say, no, here's the way we're going to do it. Here's the way I think we should do it, and start to kind of overtake some authority. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. That's just, there's a lot of unknowns in there that we're comfortable with the way things are running now. I've got a great relationship with Chad. We've discussed this whole duties of the manager and this topic before it came up today. And I told him I like the way the relationship is now. If I've got a question, I go up and talk to Chad. I've never had Chad say not now. I've never had him stare at his computer as he's talked to me. I think we've got a great working relationship, and I use him as a resource. The same thing with the mayor. You know, I've talked to the mayor, I've emailed the mayor, text message. I got a great working relationship, and that's why I'm nervous about things changing, is where are those lines drawn?
So my question is, if this came up during the consultation process of hiring the police chief, did the consultant give any insight as to why he would suggested possibly this rewording?
And I don't know how much of this rewording is reflective of what Jeff Kaler shared with us at that time. And again, I think it was more of a holistic comment. You know, a couple of the candidates had questioned, or maybe, I don't know, I didn't talk to them. Did they express concern about the mayor being in charge? Maybe they had experiences, you know, of some kind of bad relationship. He just noted those concerns, and then he provided John Anderson and myself a couple of examples and said this was something that we ought to look at. And that was the end of the conversation back in August.
So thank you.
I think oh, go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say, I think we just need to remove any personal things that we have going on or the people involved. I think we just need to look at this from an organizational point of view, because none of that's relevant, because what we're doing is going to affect future councils, future city managers, future police chiefs. So any current, you know, I'm sure things are going great. We have very reasonable, you know, great people in all these positions. So I'm sure things are running smooth now. It does seem like public safety is kind of the outlier when we've looked at how they're run in the past. I know with, you know, we made some changes with the fire department. For me personally, I don't know why we wouldn't streamline public safety the same we would with any of the other departments. And just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree that we have to look at this as if there aren't 3 people involved, but it's a structural, right? I mean, because any one of you could change at any point and then it might not be great. So I totally get that. I guess it could just be me. I still am not clear. I mean, to me, it's about, do we want an elected official ahead or a non-elected? That's sort of what I'm trying to iron out in my head. And as I think about this person oversees the public safety department, I also guess my big question is, so, you know, when the buck needs to stop somewhere, where is it going?
Well, in all honesty, if we had I think if we were a larger city and we had a mayor that was there every day, all day,
yeah,
I think it could be in the mayor's, you know, court. But I think the way ours is set up, and Chad is there every day, all day for the most part,
Mhm.
I think the duties fall on Chad's shoulders. Or I shouldn't say Chad, the city manager.
Right, right.
Or maybe what it is how do you define for sure what the relationship is between the police chief and Chad? You know, how that looks. Because then you have the police chief, the city administrator, I'll go with that, who reflects to the city council as well.
Mayor, I might make a suggestion, given the lateness of the hour and the complexity of the topic, is that the committee sleep on it. Maybe send comments to any or all three of us, and we could bring it back up at another time.
I think that's a good idea. I'd like to do some looking in other city. I know Dave and I talked about that too, about looking to see how it's set up in some other cities as well.
And can we use our peer group cities that we used for other things as well, just for a sake of uniformity?
Sure, I'll get, you know.
Yeah, we can pull that together, those 12 or 14 cities on our comparable list.
Yep, yep. That way it's not subjective.
Yep.
No, that sounds good.
Great, Ross.
I appreciate the consideration.
Okay.
Emily, I'd move adjournment.
Oh, yeah, great.
Thank you very much. It's been a long evening. I appreciate your work.